Okay, welcome back. This is The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And today we are turning to literature for the first time and discussing one of the great works of fiction, Mary Shelley's 1818 masterpiece, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Michael, what's your life experience with Frankenstein and other attendant-created monsters?
Very limited. Not my type of thing. The monster genre.
You're not
really
like you're not back in the
No.
lab on the
It's
weekend.
just not. It never appealed to me, and I basically ignored it writ large. And as I found out while reading this, at the age of 40, that it's not really a monster movie or monster book, like the ones that I was like thinking I was discarding.
I think the Hollywood adaptations of Frankenstein have given it a patina of. I mean,
and
it's
the pop cultural idea of it. I think.
The Herman Munsters, the sort of lumbering, mostly mute, kind of growling beast that's sort of just like. Rawr.
That's right.
That's not
right.
really
And like,
it's not really what you
where
find.
the most you hear about it is like, it's the monster's not actually Frank.
yeah.
Because it is such a perfect name for a monster.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
I forget where she got the name from. I think it was like someone they met on one of their travels. I've taught this book so many times. I used to teach it when I was teaching like a remedial writing class at CUNY. And we would do it because of the scene where the monster teaches itself how to read and write by spying on the people living in the cottage.
You're doing this in a remedial writing class, like, you could try this.
Yeah.
This would be one option.
Well, no, I mean, like, that's the funny thing. Like, pedagogically, a lot of remedial writing class work centers on stories about people teaching themselves to read and write. Mm-hmm. But there is, like, a kind of, you guys are monsters. And so, right? Like, there's kind of like a negative subtext to that I...
Certainly.
I'm not sure the pedagogy has fully addressed. But mostly, this is a great book to teach because it's fun, right? I mean...
Oh, yeah.
This is the book that my friend David Hobbs worked on this with Maureen McLean at NYU. And he told me that her reading was that, like, Frankenstein is like the ultimate text of romanticism writ large. It's like the book that pulls in all the themes from the sort of early 19th century German, English artistic movement that we call romanticism. It's interested in, like, childhood versus adulthood, nature versus humanity, culture, the sort of nature versus nurture debate that's getting started, right? You have like science, you have industry, you have political subtext in Frankenstein, which I don't think we'll talk too much about because it feels almost like tacked on. The whole thing with the sort of Turkish fiancés, corrupt father, and there's the sort of dealings in revolutionary France. There's a lot of stuff in this book. It's quite a rich text. And yeah, I think people come to Frankenstein often, by the time they get to me at college, they've usually either come across, like you were saying, the sort of stereotypical Hollywood view of Frankenstein, or they've had to read it in an earlier class. So it's always fun. I often start the semester off with Frankenstein because I just love how emo the monster is. I always say that, and I don't know if
he's incredibly emo.
I don't know if the students use the phrase emo anymore. It feels
like finally out of his parents' basement.
Yeah,
real vibes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, quite literally, right?
Yeah.
But as far as like the end of the world, like there's a couple things about this book. It's not an explicitly apocalyptic story. I mean, Victor Frankenstein and his monster, there's a personal apocalypse there. I mean, by the end of the novel, they're literally at the North Pole, and
Right.
Victor is dying. His whole family has been murdered by the monster. And the monster's like, all right, well, now that Victor's dead, I got nothing. So he just like goes off into the ice, which is one type of apocalypse. But mostly, I think the apocalyptic theme comes in through metaphor, right?
Yep.
That in a lot of contemporary criticism, the monster is read as a sort of image for human ambition and technological progress, scientific advancement, gone out of control, right? Like run amok. Like Victor,
Like Sam Altman is our Victor, kind of, you know.
I literally graded a paper earlier today where a student made that exact argument. So
It
it's
sounds like
like,
something a precocious undergrad might say.
yeah, I think exactly right that the risk is with AI, which we'll talk about a little later in more detail, like the idea that this technology sort of getting out of control and coming back to murder us in some way is a theme that comes up quite often. Another example is 20 years ago, there's an essay I teach on this by someone called Kim Hammond, where they talk about genetically modified foods. Do you remember genetically modified foods? Around the turn
Yeah, oh yeah.
of around 2000, there was a lot of like protests about this, a lot
It
of
was like
anger.
the early front in the like organic, not organic war. Like you used to,
Exactly.
instead of going like, where's the organic? You would be like, are these genetically
Well, no, if you go to
modified?
if you go to the grocery store, things were still stamped like no GMO,
Yeah, but I
like
just mean like it was part of the discourse in a way that it isn't anymore.
yeah, because I think we've mostly accepted that genetically
Well,
modified foods are pretty much fine.
yeah,
They haven't caused anyone to grow an extra limb or anything, or they don't seem to
right.
cause cancer at any more alarming a rate than the other
We'll see.
carcinogenic foods that we consume day to day. Yeah, I mean, we will see. There were protests where people were wearing Frankenstein masks and sort of shaking them in the face of these
Yeah.
scientists and stuff. More recently, Frankenstein has been read as a metaphor for climate change, where the monster is the sort of invention of technologies that output carbon into the atmosphere, for instance, so that humans like Victor Frankenstein sort of create this new technology. Oh, it's so wonderful, we're going to do this really good thing, but because of a lack of responsibility, this sort of indirect disastrous consequence that humans ignore for hundreds of years in this case, accumulates to become a kind of monster that is now leading to, tropical storms, wildfires, the sort of climate related disasters we hear about almost daily at this point. And that's a reading that's become really popular. One thing that's interesting about that is that one of the things that shaped the creation of Frankenstein was in fact a climate event, albeit in this case not a human caused climate event, but a volcanic eruption. So, what do you know about, before we get into that, what do you know about Mary Shelley?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Except that she was 18
Yeah.
when she wrote this, which is absolutely extraordinary. Feel like she's kind of makes her like that era's Katie Ledecky or Jennifer Capriati, you know?
Yeah.
Like what is that? That's crazy young. That's I mean the depth of this it's like Mozart level symphony as a child shit. Like this is like the level of depth, the language that she's a child,
Yeah.
you know?
Well,
Just exceptional.
yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is talking about prodigies. What fields do you normally see prodigies in? Do you know?
Music,
Yep, and
sports.
sports, but also
I don't know.
mathematics,
Oh yeah, I guess
right?
you do see them.
Yeah.
I
So
was gonna say chess.
chess is kind of exactly. Chess is a sort of form of mathematical thinking.
Yeah,
Basically, prodigies of child prodigies tend to appear in fields that are very heavily based on pattern recognition because children can develop an amazing fluidity and facility for that in a way that you don't see as many like child prodigy painters
sure.
or child prodigy writers, right? There are a few. And Mary Shelley's 18 when she writes this. She also had an incredibly good background for this. Her father was William Godwin, who was a very influential 1790s philosopher, and her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was one of the pioneering feminist thinkers of the era of the French Revolution. So her mother died sadly when she was born, in the aftermath of giving birth to Mary Shelley, in fact. But nevertheless, she was still raised in her father's house, was made acquainted with, was acquainted with her mother's writings from a very early age. She actually met Percy, her eventual husband, hanging out, because Percy used to go and hang out at Mary Wollstonecraft's grave to, I guess, pick up ladies. I don't know. It was just like a kind of goth place to hang out,
No,
and
no stone unturned type deal.
yeah, yeah. She had a great background, two very famous, successful writers as parents.
Hmm.
And her husband, Percy Shelley, was, is one of the so called canonical six British Romantic poets of this era. And he also was quite successful at a very young age. He starts publishing poems that are still read today, I think when he's 19 or 20. So she's an interesting person because she runs off with Percy basically, and Percy is already married to another lady and already has two kids with this first wife, and he essentially abandons his first wife to just run off with Mary, partly I think enchanted by her background, but also by her personally, that they would stay together for the rest of his life, though he would have repeated extramarital dalliances.
Sure.
They were radicals in the sense that they were believers in democracy, in the ideals of the French Revolution, but Percy was also a believer in what he described as free love. He didn't believe in the constraints of marriage, shall we say.
It's a it's a well thought out position though. It's not just it's not just selfish. There's a philosophical underpinning
That's
to
right.
it.
Yeah, it was, oh no, 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 this is all from my reading of Plato, you must understand, right? Rousseau advocates for this, therefore I have no
A
choice.
staunch
I
advocate.
have
Yeah.
no choice but to cheat on you. Goodbye.
Oh,
Right?
don't bring Rousseau into this.
Yeah, I think, Mary shared these ideals in theory. I think in practice, this was obviously awkward. And, you know, for better or for worse, she ends up being widowed when Percy drowns at the age of 29, just a few years after she writes Frankenstein. So, you know, their lives are also surrounded by death, right?
Yeah, it seems like there's just a lot of darkness around this group.
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time of the composition of Frankenstein, she's already given birth to one stillborn child, and they would have several other children who would either die very young or I think they had four children. I might be wrong on this, but only one of whom survived to adulthood. Also Percy Florence Shelley, who's a monster, interestingly. Not a writer, not a good guy, just kind of like a British dandy. The thing about Percy is he's like, his dad was one of the richest men in England, sort of minor noble, incredibly wealthy, and Percy and his dad did not get along. So like they always have money, but they're always in these like kind of push and pull, like you need to send us more money. Like he's constantly like fighting with his father, and frequently when they do get money, they like immediately donate it to some revolutionary cause here or there. They're really like the 18 teens 20s versions of like Patty Hearst or something, right? I mean,
Sure.
they're just like on the. I mean, they weren't kidnapped per se, but they were sort of trying to live out their ideals in a
Hmm.
which is I'm all for it. People have interpreted Frankenstein as a kind of novel about Percy, that the Victor Frankenstein is Percy, and that his he's undone by his kind of devotion to his high-minded scientific ideals. But let's get back into the context in which Frankenstein is created and introduce the other characters of this creation story.
Yeah,
So
so what was the weather, what was the climate event that this was written in the background against which it was written?
yeah, so there was a huge volcanic eruption, and I'm getting this information from Gill and Darcy Wood's book Tambora, which gives me a lot of the background. I'll quote from that in a minute. But basically, like, there was a huge volcano in Indonesia called Mount Tambora that in spring, I think, of 1815 exploded. And it's the largest volcanic eruption in recorded human history.
Okay.
And it put so much ash and pumice and gas up into the atmosphere that literally for the 2 years following the eruption, weather patterns were severely altered, such that in the Americas, the year 1816, I think, was known as the year with no summer. There were famines across northern Europe. In northern China, there was a terrible famine as well. Mostly the northern hemisphere was affected by this, but like people had no idea why this was happening. This is something I'm always like, I mentioned this to my students and they're like, oh, so they heard about the volcano and they were like, oh, that's why. It's like, no. Like at this time,
Really?
yeah, people had no idea
So
why.
it's just they're just is it just rife with speculation?
Yeah, there were a lot
People
of
are just like
God,
God's
yeah,
wrath.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
a lot
this
of
is like
God's wrath
right
here.
after the end of
I
the
guess we still have that
Oh, of
when this
course.
stuff
When
happens.
anything happens. Well,
Yeah.
this is right after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, too. Waterloo's 1815. So there's already been just like 20 years of like nonstop death all
Yeah.
across Europe. And now you have 2 years of famine after that. So yeah, there were religious uprisings, there were mass starvation events, there were plagues. This is really like an apocalyptic time. The Shelleys, although they're not yet married, are staying in Geneva with right near Percy's good friend George Gordon, Lord Byron. Do you know anything about Byron? Do you have no associations with someone's
I
like
have not, no.
so the phrase like Byronic doesn't mean anything to
No.
you? Okay, interesting. Lord Byron was the most famous writer in the world at this time, maybe rivaled only by Goethe, the German, poet novelist. So essentially, like Lord Byron was a noble, obviously a lord, and he was a poet as well. He wrote these sort of epic retellings of his travels in the East, and he kind of fictionalized his life. There's this massively successful series of poems called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage that are pretty good. Like Lord Byron's, he's a bit of a like complicated figure. He didn't think he was going to be a lord. He was like fifth in line for this baronetcy, and then like everyone ahead of him died like very quickly, and suddenly he was a lord when he was like 12. And so he inherited all these estates and all these responsibilities. He actually had to go to parliament and like he spoke in parliament. And when he was quite young, he went to Cambridge. But Lord Byron was like the Shelleys, was kind of a rebel. There's this famous anecdote where he gets to Cambridge and there's a rule on the books that says you're not allowed to have a dog in your dorm. Your chambers must be dog free. So to protest this, instead, Lord Byron brought a bear. and he just had like a bear that lived in his store. He's like, hey, there's no rules against bears, like, Lord Byron's complicated. He's bisexual. He had an affair with his half sister, for which he was later canceled in one of the earliest cancellations by, of all people, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yeah, it's long.
Wow. I mean, ahead of his time with a cancellation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was literally canceled. He like left Europe. He left England for good. Never went back. He was like, peace. He had a very tempestuous marriage. Produced one daughter, Ada Lovelace Byron, who worked with Babbage and was one of the first people to ever theorize and write about computers. Kind of interesting side note.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. Complicated guy. He didn't really come into his own as a writer, in my opinion, until a little later when he started writing these brutal satires. He has this long epic poem called Don Juan, based on the sort of Don Juan legend. Pronounced Don Juan because of the way English meter works. Never mind. He's quite a funny writer. He really hates people and is like very good at just like savagely ripping them apart. But he, like the Shelleys, was very into democracy. Despite being a noble, he went about Europe. He actually died in Greece trying to help the Greeks rebel against Ottoman rule in the 1820s. This is after Shelley had already drowned. And so, he has a kind of heroic end, despite some bumps along the way. And he's still thought very highly of in Greece to this day. So he and Shelley were friends, and they're all hanging out, and it's raining all the time because of this volcano that no one knows about. Now, do you know who the only person who was already dead by this point, but who had up until this point, only one person had theorized that like volcanoes might have something to do with the climate?
No, I obviously have no idea.
It's my old enemy, Ben Franklin.
Wait, what do you got against Franklin?
So much. Just overrated hack. Mostly this comes from years of having to teach his autobiography, where Franklin's like his like legendary wit, his like little aphorisms about, stitch in time saves nine, Basically all of his wisdom comes down to like make money. Save the money you make. It's wow, thanks. Like, get out of the way, Montaigne. Like, Ben Franklin is here.
If he was around today, would he be like one of these like big like don't keep buying avocado toasts to the millennials type guy?
Probably. That would probably be exactly what he'd be like. I just hate Franklin. I also hate that he inspired a whole Franklin impersonator industry. Like, you ever notice that? I feel like there are more Ben Franklin impersonators out there than just about any other historical figure. Something about him really rubs me the wrong way. Also, slave owner, but, politically inconvenient.
Where is that? What do you got against Franklin? Slave owner. Could lead with that.
Roasted. Also, the whole flying a key on a kite thing, he never did that, right? That never happened. He just like...
He didn't do that?
He never did it, no. He like wrote a paper about how you could do it, but he never did it.
How disappointing.
Coward. In any case, the only person I hate more than Franklin is Da Vinci. Don't get me started on
Wait, what?
Look, I'll say this for Da Vinci. At least he was a really good painter,
Uh-huh.
He was a great painter, probably the best.
You're not as interested in Franklin's artistic output?
No, Franklin's artistic output is terrible. What, his almanacs? I'm not just like cracking open the almanac after I get home from a long day at work, like oh, haha, like poor season for growing mildew or whatever. Like, anyway, no, Da Vinci. Just the fact that people are like, Da Vinci was this great inventor. Have you ever seen Da Vinci's inventions?
No.
The worst. Da Vinci's inventions are like, what if you put like big balloons on your feet so you could like walk across a river? And I'm just like, anyone who's ever been a kid has like tried to stand on like an inflatable raft, like it's not going to go well. Da Vinci invented the helicopter. Yeah, like Really? Like you try to use that thing? That thing's not going anywhere. Oh, Da Vinci invented a tank. You know what's missing from Da Vinci's tank? A door. Any way for it to steer? Yeah, just Da Vinci's inventions are all garbage. He's a terrible inventor. Really good painter, though, unlike Franklin. Not even a good painter, just a hack. Sorry. Anyway, one thing Franklin did get right, though, and this is from the Darcy Wood book, he says that Franklin's meteorological imaginations and conjectures amount to no more than a few pages of disconnected thoughts, like all of his work, scribbled amid a high-stakes diplomatic drama. This is when he was in France, I think, negotiating for American independence. The paper's unlikely fame as a scientific document rests on its being the first published speculation on the link between volcanism and extreme weather. Franklin hastily sent his paper on meteorology to Manchester, where the local Philosophical Society had awarded him an honorary membership. On December 22nd, 1784, the president of the society rose to speak on Franklin's behalf, no doubt dismayed at the paper's thinness. Ironic, Franklin, thin paper, large man. He had no choice but to read the conjectures of the society's celebrated new member to the crowded assembly. There in freezing Manchester, public hall, the theory that volcanic eruptions were capable of wreaking climate havoc was given its first public utterance and ridiculed. They were like, this is the stupidest thing. This guy's the great American genius. This guy's an idiot. Yeah. So
real Al Gore vibes.
Yeah. So Franklin was right about this for once. Broken clock. Sorry, I just hate Franklin so much. Just have such hatred for him. He was right about this, and like it was climate that had caused this like gloom to descend over all of Europe.
What was the weather actually like as a result of this when they were in this villa?
Basically, I think it didn't rise much above the 50s Fahrenheit. Like, it's just kind of rainy, gray. I don't think it was literally like snowing in Geneva in like July, but it was miserable and no one knew why. And the assumption was we must have done something to really anger God. And so they're hanging out, and to keep themselves busy, they decide to have and remember, they've been reading a lot of Gothic German, tawdry Gothic German tales. Just for entertainment. They decided, well, we could create horror stories of our own that will entertain us. And Percy's story never really gets off the ground. I think Percy's such a weird guy. He like sees his reflection and gets scared and has to like run away. He's a maniac. Lord Byron writes something that's kind of about a vampire. And then that gets taken up by his doctor, who's also hanging out with him, this guy Polidori, who turns this into a story called The Vampire. And the vampire...
His doctor.
Yeah.
Who's also a writer.
Who's just...
heard Byron's idea and was like, I'll take that.
Yeah. And Byron was like, go ahead. Byron.
Sure, yeah.
Byron was like, take it. I don't care.
This piece of shit? Yeah, go ahead.
It's all you, Polidori. Polidori, I think, is the uncle of the Rossettis, Dante Gabriel, Christina, William Michael, etc. Anyway, just an interesting footnote. Interesting to like no one but me. But anyway, the vampire becomes an important source, though, about 70, 80 years later, for an Irish writer named Bram Stoker.
Sure.
And I like to point this out because, the two iconic Hollywood monsters, got to go with Dracula, number one, top dog. And then number two is Frankenstein's monster, right? Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Just out of this one house.
Yeah, exactly. That they both kind of stem from this one incident. Yeah, I mean, Hollywood horror was born on this.
It's like, remember when COVID was happening, there was the meme of like, was it like Lear? Shakespeare wrote Lear.
Yeah.
During.
Imagine
what's gonna come of this, but this is actually kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it only took them a couple months, I guess, but
yeah. And look at all the Lears we got after COVID. I mean, so many.
Yeah. Still waiting. Although it takes longer to publish things now, I think. Got to get the whole marketing campaign behind the new King Lear that's no doubt ready to emerge.
Yeah. So Mary had a dream that inspired this story, and it was a dream of the being kind of like reaching towards her. And she and Percy were both very interested in Galvani. Are you familiar with galvanism?
Like the electrical
Yeah, yeah. Like when you get
theory.
like galvanized rubber, like for your
Yeah,
tires and stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah, Galvani was the guy who had invented running electricity through stuff, essentially.
sure.
And he famously did demonstrations where they would reanimate frogs. You know, the frog is dead, you electrocute.
What a sick fuck.
Oh, yeah. Well, they did to people, too. To
Well,
like
I'm sure it's only a stone's throw.
next step, right? You like shock a guy, a dead body, and it's leg
Did
kicks.
anyone slippery slope galvanism? Like, where does this end?
Probably. Yeah, I forget what happened to Galvani. Probably nothing good. Um, yeah, so they're already interested in this idea, right? That of electricity being somehow the spark of life, and so I think the
Yeah,
story really flows from that. Now, Victor in the story is inspired by like the death of his mother, right? His mother dies, and this leads him to be, shattered. He says, there must be some way that I could overcome this seemingly ideal boundary between life and death, right? It has to be possible. There has to be some way I can do it. Goes off to college at Ingolstadt and spends, he has some pushback from some of his professors, right? The other thing is Victor's really into like alchemy. He's really into Paracelsus and Cornelius Agrippa, uh, Albertus Magnus, who are all like medieval sort of scientists who by the novel set in the 1790s, I think, by that time, the, the professors are like, what? Like, it would be like the equivalent of you going into, university and being like, yeah, I want to study like Galvani. I want to use
right.
Galvani's experiments. Like, professor would be like, well, we've like made a few advancements since
Yeah, yeah.
since 1800, right? Like, you'd be like, and you're just being Victor's like, I like f you, like, no, you're wrong.
Sure.
He's like very stubborn, and he locks himself away for 2 years and does nothing but like work on his creation, which is
But
odd.
we aren't told like how he makes the monster,
No,
really,
no, we aren't. Well,
despite
I
all
mean, we
this.
know that he goes to graveyards and like charnel houses and gathers like
Yeah,
body
but the
parts.
reanimation process.
No, she keeps that secret. In the novel, I think Victor's like, I shall not tell for fear that you would try to replicate my methods,
Right,
or
right, right.
something. Which is, it's that great thing where if you're ever writing a story and the main character is like a great poet, don't ever show any of their poetry unless you are also a great poet.
Also a great poet.
Or
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
comedian, right? If someone's writing a story about a great comedian and then you have them do a stand-up set and it's
And it's
terrible.
just brutal. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like some hack's idea of like what a great stand-up set is. That
I
kind
mean,
of
you could do what a lot of like up and coming stand-ups do and hire a stand-up to write it.
you could. But you know what I'm saying? That's kind of what she's doing. She's like,
Yeah,
I shall not tell you the particulars. But it's like, well, because obviously, because it's not real, right? But
right.
in films, like, how is this usually represented? Like, how does the
It's like
monster?
an electrical
Yeah,
shock. Yeah.
but it's interesting that that's not in the novel. Like,
No.
he for all we know, it's some like poultice that he like rubs together and sprinkles on
Right.
the limbs or whatever. We're not given any explanation. When he creates this monster, setting aside what actually happens, like this presents a really hard apocalyptic scenario. Namely,
Hmm.
like if we could conquer life and death, like that in and of itself would be an apocalypse, right?
100%. One that a lot of people seem to be pushing
Oh
for,
yeah, really hard,
right?
right?
Yeah,
The fantasy of this singularity. I'm
that's
just
right.
gonna upload myself and I'm gonna live forever.
Yeah,
And
in the cloud.
it's like, well, what's the implication of like,
I'm gonna live right beside my photos.
oh yeah, that's too good. Oh, there's my iTunes music purchases.
Yeah, yeah,
There's my mortal soul. Like,
yeah. I mean, in this case, it would be like usually with these immortality situations, like you can still die a violent death,
Yeah,
right? So like
but
the
even in
monster
this,
could be murdered.
right? But I mean, theoretically, it could still be brought back, right?
Yes, yes.
You could
You could just keep pumping it full.
sew the arm back on or whatever, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
but yeah, like a plane crash or some scenario that could happen, sure. But
Well, I
if
mean, that's the thing about the that sort of apocalypse, right? Is that like you obviously just like if you have to have the immortality thing has to be with scarcity. You couldn't ever like actually give it to everybody. I mean, it would make no sense from like a resource perspective. So, or
right,
at least until you had somehow also conquered the need for natural resources, right? Right.
yeah,
Whereas a lot of these guys, like it seems that
they don't ever think
they're
about
at
that.
the plan. Well, because the plan is you're going to need a lot of money to live at all soon.
Yeah,
And when we really dwindle these numbers down, right? These guys plan to kind of be like the last man standing. That's what it kind of feels like. There's like a survivalist perspective to it that, like, by virtue of surviving with their amassed wealth, the looming climate apocalypse that they think a lot of them do think is like coming, that when they emerge, their prize should be they also get to live forever after defeating like
yeah,
the rest of humanity. It's like it's very, very interesting to think that any of that is how this is actually going to go down.
yeah. And I mean, we're seeing that with Mark Zuckerberg, like buying up Hawaiian Islands and like building
A bunch of them, yeah. Nuclear silos they
bunkers.
get.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, the silos. Uh, and at a certain point, they are like Victor, right? The motivator really is just fear of death, right?
It has
Whatever
to be because like
happens,
they don't seem to have it's weird because they present themselves as visionaries, right? But they don't seem to have anything particularly imaginative about
no.
what they would do. It just seems to be like just to be there.
It
It
reminds
doesn't
me of
it
that scene in The Office, the British version, when they're doing the team building exercise, and they ask, what's your one dream? And Ricky Gervais, so David Brent says, like, to live forever, right? And
yeah,
just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and
Yeah, that's right.
that it's like the kind of petty, egotistical, like, imagination.
Yeah. I mean, it is and the funny thing is about those guys is that for all their like,
I'm the one
incredible knowledge
shaping,
that
I'm the
they're
shaper
much
of the future.
closer.
To,
These
to,
guys are like much closer to David Brent than they think.
oh,
You know.
that's exactly right. So Victor has spent 2 years. He's like cut off everyone. He's not talking to his friends. He's not talking to his family. He's like,
Oh
he's
yeah.
he's just like in
Yeah.
the
Got
attic.
more important
He's in the
things to
attic
do.
of his like expansive dorm room, like
Yeah.
literally like lining up like shin bones and like sewing on muscles and stuff.
Everyone else is doing shots.
Yeah, no,
Keg
exactly.
stands.
His social life is just not in Germany, right? Great beer, like,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's also like he's not talking to his parents and stuff. His dad and like his girlfriend who's betrothed to, they're like writing to him, and he's just like, whatever, back to the monster. I think like the moment of the creation is really interesting. This is book one of Frankenstein, chapter 4. I'll just read a little excerpt here. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful? Great God, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. So, like, Victor...
By a real buyer's remorse, huh?
Exactly, right? Victor spent 2 years of nonstop work on this thing, right?
Like,
And
this thing looks like shit.
yeah, like the instant it comes to life. And like presumably 5 minutes before he was like, well, there it is, da da da. And then he like
Yeah.
he does the final step. It comes to life and he's like, what the right? Like just like what have I done? This thing is
Right.
hideous. This is a disaster. Is that like does that strike you as realistic? Like that he just be
I mean, yeah, I guess that, yeah, you do have to like make the leap because obviously you have some idea of what it was going to look like as he gets to the final
Well, I
stages.
mean,
I
he's
think.
presumably had all the time in the world to like create this. Also,
Yeah.
like we should note, the creature is 8 feet tall. Like
Mhm.
the creature is like taller than Manute Bol, right? It's like it's like the massive
Yeah, he
like
clears Yao Ming.
oh yeah, just dwarfs him,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
he has given him like these really pale complexion,
Yeah.
these black lips for some reason, this long flowing black mane of hair, and yellow eyes. And I think what's important is like the moment it comes to life, he enters into the uncanny valley. Are you familiar with that phrase, the uncanny valley?
No.
It's like a term people use to describe robots. Like if a robot looks like a robot and is very like metal arms and legs and it's putzing around, you're like, oh, it's a robot. But if a
Hmm.
robot you put like a bunch of plastic skin on a robot and it walks out and it's like a mannequin kind of coming to life, people are repulsed by it. People are like, get that
Sure.
away from me, right?
Right.
That people talk about this with CGI also. Like when you see an early CGI effort where it's supposed to be a person, but you can just tell it's like that kind of is just it disgusts people.
Hmm.
That being or creation has fallen into the uncanny valley. And the goal of like CGI is to get onto the other side where like you can
Right.
replicate someone seamlessly. Similarly, create a robot that's like the replicants in Blade Runner, right? That like is
Hmm.
indistinguishable from a human being. Because up until a certain point, people see a robot and they're just like, oh, get the disgusting thing away from me. It's kind of what Victor is having here, right? He's like, I thought it looked beautiful. It looked beautiful when it was dead. But now that it's moving around, I'm like, this is not what I wanted at all. Have you ever had this experience though, where you've worked really hard on something for a really long time, you've been caught up in it completely, and then it's finally done, and you like step back to look at your work, and you're just like, "This is the worst
This
thing
isn't.
I've ever done
Yeah.
in my
Oh,
life."
yeah. It's a matter of routine.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, I think this is where the metaphor to like the Sam Altmans of the world falls short, right? Because he like immediately is like repulsed and bails out.
whereas
Whereas
Silicon
whereas
Valley
these guys
guys.
just like remain convinced that everything is just
But
fucking
don't you
hunky
think Mark
dory.
Zuckerberg, the first time he like tested out the metaverse, some part of him must have been like, "This
Yeah,
sucks."
maybe on that occasion, that's a little different, right? I
But
don't think he ever
it's kind
experienced
of
that.
similar to, though, because you're creating this simulacrum of reality and like
Yeah, but like I guess Zuckerberg had had a whole series of successes that he was obviously very
riding
happy
high. Oh
with.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that is kind of funny though, the idea of just like Zuckerberg abandoning the metaverse to everybody and
Which is what has happened. I mean, he's
yeah, yeah.
abandoned it. So a lot of people
But
focus.
not as quickly as this guy.
No, Victor's
This guy
immediate. Yeah,
is
yeah.
like fuck the
Zuckerberg took. There's a couple media cycles of it
I
like
mean
not
he hemorrhaged billions of dollars before he
like
took off.
$60 billion apparently. Like some insane amount of money was spent on that, and yeah. So what happens with the monster? Like the monster is abandoned immediately. Victor like runs out. The monster is like he goes back to his bedroom. Victor's like, oh, damn, like that didn't work, you know. So close and yet so far. All right, off to bed. And he just like leaves the monster like in the lab. and
Yeah.
it's like
Thinking what could possibly go
well, the
wrong? Let's just
monster's
leave it
like
down here.
mama, right? Like it's just like
Yeah, yeah.
it's just like feeling around, and then Victor wakes up to find the monster literally like reaching for him, being like,
Hmm.
"Daddy, teach me." Victor's like, "Oh, get away from me, you wretch!" He like he hates it. He like bats it away. He runs out of his apartment, and he goes and like sleeps out in like the courtyard of someone else's dorm. By chance, the next day, his friend Henry is coming to visit. Monster, of course, will ultimately murder Henry if you're not. And Henry's like, Victor, it's been so long. Great to see you, chap, you know. And he goes back to his apartment with Henry, and he's like, "Wait here for a second." He looks in, and he's
I
like,
love this part.
"He's like, is it gone? Oh, it's gone. All right, yeah, come on in." You know, it's just like, does like nothing to.
Yeah, so what is that? He doesn't feel any responsibility to figure out where the monster is.
No, no. Doesn't what might happen to it? I mean, what should Victor have done once he realized he hated the monster? Like logically
I
speaking.
probably gone to authorities and been like, all right, I think there's an 8-foot monster
All
on
right,
the
yeah,
loose.
yeah. That's one thing he definitely should have done. Second of all, well, first of all, he tells no one about the monster, right? Which is awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe like get your gun and be like, well, this didn't work. You know,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
like
yeah, you
just
could.
like
Well, I meant more like
euthanize.
once he's out there,
Oh
it's like
yeah,
time to get a
but
search
even
party
just like
together.
immediate in the immediate aftermath of being like,
Yeah,
this is a disaster. I want to just like take it off the board. You know.
yeah. It's also like the conversation with the other dude. It's like he's like, so what are you been up to? It's like, oh no, no, I don't know, hanging out. Yeah, good to see you. It's like, what have you been working on all this time? Yeah,
Oh,
doing my
studies. You
thing.
know, gonna get my diploma. Yeah. The monster runs away. We learn later that it grabs one of Victor's coats because it's cold. Very conveniently, like all of his like, his address book and like it's just like
Right, of
this is where he can find and murder my family is like in the pocket, right? Including a notebook about like how he made the monster and what the monster is, right?
course.
Very convenient. There's a lot of things in this book that I love that are just so convenient, right? Like the monster later finds a little cabin where there's just like this convenient crack in the wall where he can just stay and not be noticed for months, observe everything he needs to and never interfere,
Just get all the training he could possibly want. What are the
yeah, it's
chances?
one. He's going through the forest. He finds a bag full of books, and they're like the three most perfect books. It's like Plutarch, the story of the great lives of ancient men, right? Then there's Milton's Paradise Lost,
Paradise Lost.
and
Yeah.
then Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, like the most emo, like over the top. It's like wow, those three books really a tailor made.
The really early emo of that book. It's
Tailor
so
made.
good.
Oh, really? Truly, the invention of emo occurred in Goethe.
Hmm.
Like the monster's just like rejected nonstop by humanity, right? He like lumbers into a village and is like trying to eat, and like these people see him and they're like, "WTF? Like get the
I do love
guards."
that. I do. That's the part that's so fun because it's like you have this weather event, in while they're writing it. It's
Uh
like
huh.
it's so funny to think of like because the monster isn't like it's not like Godzilla. You know what I mean?
No,
Like
no,
it's 8 feet.
that's very
You're living in a
big.
time, right? Like you said, like how they're like we don't even know they didn't know about the volcano, right? They couldn't figure it out.
Yeah,
It's like it's obviously it would be like what the fuck is going on, but like the way that he describes the monster, it's like you could see some people being like, I've never seen this before, but like
but
after
whatever.
that, you're like, I don't know what happened to this guy's skin. I don't know how he grew so tall, but like, he's at the tavern hanging out. I'm not going to be like, are you a monster?
Right, but
It'd
people's
be very
reaction to it
rude.
immediately are just like, get the guns, get the torches.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's throw
That's right.
bricks at this thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone he meets, except with one exception in the entire novel, immediately attacks him.
Right.
Which
I feel
is
like I would just be like, you'll never guess who came into the pub. This
yeah.
guy.
So he runs away. He finds this cabin. He conveniently the Felix, one of the kids living in the cabin, has a wife who he has to teach how to read and write because she's Turkish. Yada yada. Again,
Mhm.
incredibly convenient that there should just be
Yeah.
like a literacy lesson going on in this random cabin. So the monster learns to read and write. Eventually, he reads the letters he has in his pocket, learns about Victor, says, "Well, I should go after he said, well, the monster falls in love with the people in the cottage, right? He's a voyeur. I tell my students, like, the monster has a parasocial relationship with these people. It is as though they are the equivalent of like Twitch streamers or YouTubers. Right. That the monster is like, oh, well, I know everything about them. They know nothing about me. But
they're coming to my town for a live show. I'm going to come and hang out.
I'll be best friends. Right? Yeah. That is a very dangerous but tragically common phenomenon. Yes. And you see these true crime stories about when that goes wrong, and like, this sort of John Lennon scenario plays itself out, except on
that's right.
the Twitch streamer level or something. It has happened. It's very dark. But he gets rejected by the people. He approaches the blind father, and the blind father's like, yes, yes. Oh, hello, traveler. Like, how are you? And the implication being that, like, because he cannot see what a freak the monster is, he's like, but as soon as the other people come in, they just like, they're instantaneously are just like swinging baseball bats at him, like trying to. So he gives up on his dream, his desolation. He, on the way to Victor's, he like rescues a girl who's like drowning in a river, and the father of the girl sees him holding her, and he just pulls out his gun and just shoots him. It's awesome, right? I mean, I love the monster being rejected. He eventually meets up with Victor on the mountaintop. He murders Victor's brother. He sees Victor's brother and he's like, oh, there's a child. Like, he probably isn't prejudiced against me. I can like kidnap the child and like raise him up to be my one friend. And
like when he starts talking to Victor though, he's such a like emo bitch.
Oh yeah, no, I'll read a little bit of that in a second.
It's so intense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he has just murdered Victor's brother, because like the kid is just like William Frankenstein is just like, stay away from me, you ogre. You're like a horrible monster. My daddy is Dr. Frank, is like Mayor Frankenstein. He's like an important guy in the city. And as soon as he hears the name Frankenstein, he's like, ah, and he just literally just strangles the child, and then blames the murder on the Frankenstein family babysitter, right? He plants evidence on her. It's like, why did you do that? It's just so evil. He sees Victor, and Victor immediately, as soon as he hears his brother is dead, he's just like, well, the monster did it, right?
Yeah. He's back.
And when he's coming home, he like, there's a flash of lightning, and like off on the side, it's like the monster is there. He's like, oh great, I was right, it is the monster.
Oh, isn't this just fucking perfect?
Yeah, this is the one thing I didn't want to have happen. So he goes up to the mountains to get away from it all after the stress of like his brother's funeral and then the subsequent hanging of the family babysitter, Justine. And he sees the monster. And the monster's like leaping through the mountains and is like, I always telling my students, it's like the monster is like a bigger Shaq with the athleticism of like, with the spryness of like Allen Iverson, right? Like he's this like unfathomable mix of athletic attributes. It's like, Victor, when you create your next monster, maybe don't make him like the most perfect athlete and like who's a giant killing machine, just like so much of this is.
And if you're going to like at least teach him the 3-pointer. The game has changed so much.
He meets the monster and he says in book 2, devil, this is Victor, do you dare approach me? And do you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I might trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered. And then the monster says, I expected this reception. All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You propose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you, and the rest of mankind. If you comply with my conditions, I will leave you them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends. It's like, whoa, monster. And then Victor says, abhorred monster, fiend that thou art, the tortures of hell are too mild a vengeance for thy crimes. Wretched devil, you reproach me with your creation. Come on, then, that I may extinguish the spark which I so negligently bestowed. My rage was without bounds. I sprang on him, impelled by all feelings which which can arm one being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me and said, "Be calm." I love the monster. He's just like leaping at the monster. The monster's just like, dodge, no problem.
Yeah, I expected this reception.
Yeah. Be calm, I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature. I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. This is the incel vibe, right? Everyone around me is happy, but I'm lonely. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend.
Why doesn't anything good ever happen to me?
Yeah, exactly.
Even though you've like stumbled onto this literature that's made you like this incredibly well-spoken monster in a very short period of time. Some things have gone your way.
He says, "Begone, I will not hear you. There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies. Begone, or let us try our strength in a fight in which one must fall." So, like, if I were Victor and the monster came up to me and was like, "I entreat you, my lord, I should be like thy Adam, but rather," he's like giving all these I would be like, wow, like, where did you?
I did it.
Like, where did you learn all of this? This is amazing.
For having built
this is amazing. Like, you are a marvel. And like, this isn't that long after he created it, right? It's like just some months later. It's kind of unspecified, but
he's got no questions as to how this happened.
Doesn't care at all. The monster will tell him eventually, but it's very strange, right? So the big crux of the whole novel is that like the monster really wants a girlfriend, right?
Shocking. Like, it's like no matter what world we're in, it comes down to
no escaping it. So
this incel being like, I want to get a girlfriend.
It's really funny. Victor like makes up these elaborate excuses. He goes up to the north of Scotland, postpones his wedding, makes all these contrivances, and he's gonna remake the female creature. And like, this is the last apocalyptic like aspect of the novel I want to touch on before we wrap up. He says, as I sat, he's in his little like lab in Scotland, and he suspects the monster is there. Like, the monster probably followed him. As I sat, a train of reflections occurred to me, which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before, so this is just 3 years have passed since he made the monster, right? 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner and created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. I was now about to form another being, of whose disposition I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate, and delight for its own sake in murder and wretched. 10,000 times more malignant? I mean, that's little
bit of sexism in there.
Yeah.
The woman's gonna be even crazier.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not. And she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with the compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in female form? So it's like he already hates himself. So if I make a girl,
she's not even hot.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Victor.
Victor's so canceled. She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man, right? She might be into Victor, not into the
Yeah.
monster.
Then we got a real problem.
Yeah.
Sounds like a sequel.
She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species.
That I love. That I love that he is like, wait a minute, what if she's not into him? Then we gotta then how many people is this motherfucker gonna kill?
Exactly.
Like, where does it end? Like I like this because he's like really engaged with what he did after having no like
Having not engaged with it
desire to
at
think
all,
through it
at
while he was
all
doing it.
for 3
Right.
years, right?
Which kind of like makes a bit of sense to me in the way of like, you know, when you get those guys, you'll once a year you'll get someone write an article that's like, I worked at Facebook and I now don't use a computer because of what I know it's doing to our brains, the attention economy and all this. Like these like
Yeah.
converts who like they get into the hallowed walls of Twitter or Google or whatever,
Yeah.
they get these jobs
They
and then
realize it's evil.
yeah, oh my gosh,
And now
this is a problem.
they're gonna expose the Wizard of Oz for all of us
Right.
to
And
see.
somehow people who like have nothing to do with any of these companies could just take one look for 5 seconds and be like, that's not going to be good.
Yeah. No,
But this guy thinks he's like really breaking it. Like, it's actually meant to be addictive. That's why we chose the scrolling method. Did you know that? It's like, yeah, we fucking know. We're all addicted.
Wow, thanks. Thanks for the shocking news. So the one thing the monsters promises to do is that if he makes a girlfriend for him, he'll go to South America and he'll leave Europe, which is hilarious because it's like, oh yeah, well, there's no people there, right? Like,
Yeah, we'll just put the just it's like the monsters just become like colonizers.
yeah, well, essentially, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a post-colonialist reading of this that gets into that, but even if they were to leave Europe, inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children. And a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth, who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. So it's
But
like,
you don't even like the sense I get
Yeah.
from listening to the monster is that it didn't have to go this way. And in fact, it seems like he has the capacity to not do that. And in fact has been like, I won't do this stuff anymore.
like here's like a reasonable agreement. Like you should
Yeah.
should do a
After,
few
like-
things for me
right.
after you abandoned
Right.
me.
And
And
sure, I've been acting out, but in fairness,
I
you
did
also
murder your
killed me.
brother. My bad. You know,
But,
and pinned it
Victor,
on-
you've not been the greatest fucking creator.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
You haven't been the greatest creator. Meanwhile, this guy's like, oh no, this monster that I made is immediately irredeemable forever. Even though all those other options might actually like stave off the apocalypse, the
Well,
danger.
also,
and the
like he's worried
terror
about
that he's
he's
scared
worried
of.
about them having kids. Like, what's an easy way to fix that?
Right. Aren't you in control of this
Aren't you
process?
making the female monster? Are you like, is there some
Right.
requirement that she
Right.
be able to
Right.
like reproduce? Like, right? Like, don't put those parts into her body. Like, come on.
Just don't put the parts in.
Yeah,
Just don't put the parts in.
he's in control, but he's like, no, they might have kids. And then he imagines this fantasy of like a race of monsters, literally like surging over humanity. Because,
No doubt come back to find him.
well, of course, but also just kill everyone because they're
Yeah.
more athletic. This is a kind of like evolutionary anxiety, right? Evolution wouldn't be theorized formally for another 40, 50 years after this, but these ideas were already in circulation. I mean, Charles Darwin's granddad, Erasmus Darwin, was already like on the case and like talking about evolution in the 1790s. Erasmus Darwin, overlooked. Also, Erasmus Darwin was one of those scientists who wrote his scientific papers as poems.
Really?
Yeah. So,
We have no flair anymore.
Yeah,
man.
I
They
mean,
had
that's-
some flair. They had
I mean,
some flair.
that's like a real throwback. Like that's going back to the ancient Greeks. Like the
Yeah.
Greek philosophers would write their like treatises as poems, or Plato. Plato wrote plays, right? I mean, the Socratic dialogue. Any case, Erasmus Darwin is very funny. A decent poet too. Not he's no Percy Shelley. Let's put it that way. Had I a right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had been moved by the sophisms of the being I had created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats, but now for the first time the wickedness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at the price, perhaps, of the existence of the whole human race. So he's like, again, but Victor is so egotistical. He's like, oh, future generations might blame me for destroying them. So
Yeah.
I don't want my bad name to be like caught up. Like he can't get out of this like
I mean, I have a bit of respect for that, playing through the metaphor that like these these types today, they have no shame like that. They don't check themselves in that way at all,
no, and they
you
all
know?
want their names to be on everything, right? They're
Well,
like
it's like this idea that like, well, there's going to be a bit of turbulence in the next 100 years, but we're going to, that turbulence just happens to be like the death of billions of people. But, like just the way it's supposed to go right now, things are going to work out. Whereas at least this guy's like, you know,
yeah.
I don't think I can actually go through with this.
Just finishing up the passage, Victor, he's working on the female monster's body. It's like right there. It's like, I trembled and my heart failed within me. When on looking up, I saw by the light of the moon the demon at the casement. So the monster's just like at the window looking in the whole time. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me, where I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me. Yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had loitered in forests, hid himself in caves, or taken refuge in wide and desert heaths, and he now came to mark my progress and claim the fulfillment of my promise.
But he doesn't like weigh in. He doesn't weigh in,
No,
right?
the
Which is
monster's just
interesting. It's
like the monster's just like smiling in. He's like, oh,
and the
you
monster like looks like shit.
yeah.
And he's now asked him to make a female because it's so important to
Well, I
him.
mean, the
But he
monster.
hasn't. He doesn't care what the female looks like. It seems
No,
he's
no,
got no
no. He's
input.
happy. He's really
He's
thrilled.
fine.
He's
Yeah,
like,
just put
oh,
something together.
Victor's making the girl monster. It's all
Yeah,
his dreams about to So I looked on him. His countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. Thought with sensation of madness, my promise of creating another like to him, and trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. So he sees
Well, I guess, and the monster's watching him like tear it up.
oh yeah, and the monster
Yeah.
immediately is
I mean,
like,
that's
monster's like, why God, why? Like the
yeah,
monster
yeah. He's like,
just starts screaming. This is like his worst. Right, it's like the incel's like about to get married, and the
Right.
the wife leaves him at
Yeah.
the altar. Right, I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
the
that's right.
it's like the worst realization of the monster's fantasy.
Or the dad's like, you can't marry this sack of shit.
Yeah, yeah. They're
That's
like,
the book.
does anyone object? And it's like
Yeah, and everyone.
everyone objects. That would be awesome.
I know. One day.
So the monster's like, I'll be with you at your wedding night. Like, you've betrayed me. I'm not going to... Immediately goes and just murders Victor's best friend, Henry. Eventually, he frames Victor for it. Victor gets off, though, because he's rich. And then Victor gets married. Elizabeth, his wonderful bride, who's also his cousin. Never mind. They go off on their honeymoon, and Victor like takes the monster's threat, like, I'll be with you on your wedding night, to mean he's going to kill him on his wedding night. Because again, Victor's like an egomaniac. He can only, and it's like, no, Victor, like, what has the monster done to hurt you so far? It's like killed your friend, killed your brother.
He just wants you to suffer. How have you not figured this out yet?
He's very dumb. So he kills Elizabeth, of course. Victor's like got guns and stuff. He's like on patrol, and hears the scream from the bedroom, and like Elizabeth's dead, right? In the movie version that Kenneth Branagh did, where Robert De Niro plays the monster, curious choice. The monster is 8 feet tall. Robert De Niro is a 5'5", right? I mean, it's trick photography.
He's pretty good. He's pretty compelling in it, though.
Yeah,
it's not a particularly good movie, but
no, but it's fun. I like
his look is good.
He's like, does some good screams. In the Branagh movie, Victor brings his wife back to life, but then she has more in common with the monster, and they end up all dying together. It's a real disaster. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think of Frankenstein? Any final takeaways?
I mean, let's talk a little bit just about this last idea of like the fear of
The mo-
artificial intelligence,
yeah, because
right?
that's sort of where I see this. I mean, this is considered by many to be the first sci-fi novel, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the way it came across when reading it
Yeah,
now. It definitely feels like the elements that we see so often in modern day current sci-fi are definitely,
yeah. I mean,
there's a ton that's coming out
The
of this.
Terminator. The Terminator is this.
What's the Deus Ex Machina, or Ex Machina it's just
Yeah,
called,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Where the guy like makes the woman. I mean,
Or
a thousand of
her,
those.
right? I mean, some of these films we'll
Right.
talk about in the future.
That's right. And this is kind of like a foundational text for all of
Oh,
this,
the
right?
Hulk, right? The guy gets irradiated, becomes this
Yeah.
monster. Right?
Right.
The Hulk is this combined with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Like the other. Anyway,
Right.
um,
It's interesting that, like, instead of having Victor like get too deep, right? It's like the interesting choice that's made as opposed to most of what you see. It's like, instead of the creator getting too deep into a mess and it's inescapable, and he immediately removes himself
yeah,
from
yeah.
engagement with the
He
thing.
abandons it. I think that, yeah,
Yeah.
to me, that's the most striking part of it, right? Is that his creativity, his creation of the monster is mostly marked by neglect, right?
Yeah.
He neglects the creature. And then what
Right.
he
In fact,
does,
in a way, the least important part is the creation,
yeah,
because he doesn't follow. There's no point in him having created it because he doesn't involve himself with it.
yeah,
You know.
exactly. Um, Now, what this fantasy of them reproducing and them coming back to take over like humanity? I mean, this is where like you said, like the sort of self-replicating
Mhm.
creation that comes back to haunt you, right? I mean,
Like a Cylon in
yeah,
Battlestar.
exactly. I mean, literally every sci-fi trope is like this, right? I mean,
Mhm.
this is like where all of this stuff comes from. This anxiety, the idea of the mad scientist, right? I
Yeah.
always ask my students, I'm like, do you guys know any mad scientists IRL? Have you ever met a mad scientist? No one ever has. Kind of
Yeah.
disappointing, right? If you imagine meeting a scientist and you're like, oh my god, like I think this
This
guy's
one's mad.
yeah, like I think you like go to his lab. There's like a spider robot that's like stinging
But
things.
like, what do you think Shelley is trying to say? I mean, she's not obviously speaking about fears of AI because it's up, but like,
No,
when it comes to technological advancement and
well, I think
the environment and all that stuff, like, what do you think her?
I think I think it's a warning about ambition, right? To keep your
Yeah.
ambition under check, and that
Yeah.
when you create something, whether it be a work of art or a political movement, or that you got to have responsibility for it, right? That you can't just
Right.
abandon it and let it run pell mell, or
Right.
there will be negative consequences that will come
And I
back
think
to haunt you.
that's sort of what I think ends up coming around to the modern day that we're talking about, which, like, the two elements, there's really no responsibility, it seems, in any of these facets, when it comes to the preservation conservation of the environment, the preservation conservation of our minds as they interact with this stuff,
Yeah,
preservation interaction, the preservation and conservation of culture. There's no responsibility. It's just
right.
like
It's
this
like
free for
let's
all.
just
There's
have
this,
the AI scrape all of Shakespeare and
and
every
this,
other
like,
literary,
this hands up. It's inevitable
it's out of my
too.
hands.
Hey,
Yeah, I can't.
it's out of my
I
hands.
can't
That's a
stop it.
very. It's sort of like a Victor like thing, in a way, of just being like, well, I mean, what can you do? It's here now.
Yeah,
And then the second piece of it I find just as interesting, which I think, I think, really dictates the way I think about why nothing happens. That, like, the sad thing about what we have is, just feels like our ambitions are pretty boring.
yeah,
The people who are in charge and leading this stuff, like, they think, because it's like they've become their own sci-fi characters,
yeah,
and they seem to think that, like, this immortality is somehow, uh has within it some sort of inherent value
yeah. It's good in and of
to be
itself.
alive forever.
Yeah,
But let's be honest, like, there's not even enough inherent value to be alive for 80 years. Like, you got to make something mean something.
that's right.
And like, we don't really do a
Well,
great
and these
job
are
of
people
making
who
something mean something right now as a society, I don't think.
these are people who would find Mary Shelley's book that she wrote when she was a teenager to be boring or not interesting. You know, and the only works of literature they like are like Ayn Rand, which are all just
that
like
is among the greats for
well,
sure.
Have you ever read Ayn Rand, Michael?
I read the Atlas.
Oh, you read Atlas Shrugged. Nice.
Yeah.
Did you read The Fountainhead though?
No.
Oh, The Fountainhead's great. I mean, it's
I just detested. I just detested that.
Oh, it's her philosophy.
It's laughable.
Her philosophy is loathsome and childish.
I thought it was very funny. I mean, because
it's
like
a pulp novel. She's a pulp
novel. And like I knew enough to hate
funny.
it going in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
You know? Like to read Shelley's Frankenstein and think of it as boring is insane.
Well,
like,
it's much more sophisticated.
It's a fucking banger of a book.
It's great.
It really is.
It's great.
It's funny, like we've done the stuff we've done so far.
Yeah.
And like even the stuff that I like, you know, pretty like Last of Us is a cool show.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Arrival.
It's a funny reminder of like there's levels to this shit. And
Yeah.
like to go from the Postman in Waterworld to this book was a pretty funny experience.
Good. Well,
Kevin Costner's not quite thinking of things at the same level as Mary Shelley.
Costner maybe not as rigorous a reader of Rousseau as.
Yeah.
All
right.
This is great. So, what are we talking about next week? Do you remember?
I think it's Strangelove.
That's right. It won't be. One of the great directors, Stanley Kubrick. A really smart film. A really funny.
One of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best movies of all time. And so we'll be moving from, possible world annihilation at the hands of self-replicating Frankenstein monsters to the very real possibility of nuclear annihilation. And I'm really looking forward to it. So
yeah.
Remember to subscribe, tell your friends about the pod, follow us on Instagram at The End of the World WMS. And anything else you want to plug, Michael?
No, but I was just going to say, this is The End of the World with Michael and Stu. I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And we'll get that right.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again next week.
All right. Look forward to it. Just want to say a quick thank you to my friend Catherine Eng for her introducing me to the Gillen Darcy Wood and environmentalist reading of Frankenstein. See you guys next week.